I wonder what sort of pressure the DNI was facing, because the Washington Post has reported, and we have just confirmed, that the acting director of national intelligence, the DNI, threatened to resign if he could not speak freely before Congress.
He must be under immense pressure right now from the White House and from the DOJ. He really is stuck between a rock and a hard place here. There's very little that he could do but to give the Congressional Intelligence Committees the disclosure. That would be proper, in my opinion.
So it seems like the DNI was getting pressure from the DOJ, from the White House. There was talk that this had to go to the White House because this person, the complaint was about somebody outside of the intelligence community. The complaint was about the President of the United States. Does that hold water to you? To have to go to the source, to say to the source, this complaint is about you? Do you think it's proper for us to let Congress see it?
That's not proper whatsoever. This is the fox in the hen house. Essentially, they are saying that the White House has the authority to investigate itself, which it does not. The person with the authority to investigate this disclosure is the Intelligence Community Inspector General and the Congressional Intelligence Committees. The Inspector General is an independent entity. He has said that this is credible. He has said it's urgent. His determination stands despite whatever any attorney at DOJ says or at DNI says.
Again, the acting director of the National Intelligence, Joseph Maguire, had threatened to resign if he could not speak freely before Congress. He apparently feared the White House might attempt to force him to stonewall when he provides testimony on Thursday. That is tomorrow. We will find out if he will be able to speak freely tomorrow or what might happen. Ken Dilanian has just matched this reporting by the Washington Post. Ken, does this mean that Joseph Maguire will be allowed to speak freely? Is that happening now?
The last I was able to check with his office, Katie, that was the plan, that he intends to appear tomorrow before Congress. But what we're learning now is that there's more to this decision than simply him deciding to do it. There was some tension and turmoil and apparently an attempt to prevent him, and he threatened to resign if he wasn't allowed to speak freely. And the backdrop here, Katie, is that Maguire has felt caught in the middle of this. He inherited this whistleblower complaint coming in an acting capacity in this role, never really wanting this job. He was director of the National Counterterrorism Center. He's a retired Navy SEAL with a long history of service to his country. And he was agnostic about whether this complaint had to be turned over to Congress. He consulted with the Justice Department because it obviously named the president, and he thought it was very sensitive, and was told in no uncertain terms that this was not an urgent concern. This was not a complaint that involved the intelligence community, and their position was he should not hand it over to Congress. And so he felt like he was hamstrung.
Ken, why did he consult the Justice Department? Is that normal procedure?
Well, typically these kinds of complaints are about, something far lower down the totem pole in the intelligence community than the President of the United States. And so having talked to a few people, and one can only surmise that it was such a sensitive matter, it was such a hot potato involving the President, he felt like it was the right thing to do to consult others. Now, of course, Democrats in Congress are arguing that the law does not provide for that. It says flatly that he doesn't have discretion. And once the Inspector General determined that this was an urgent concern, it should have gone right to Congress within the prescribed period. Obviously, there's a disagreement. We see the OLC opinion today. The Justice Department says, well, no, none of that applies because we decided this wasn't a matter of the intelligence community. But bottom line, Joe Maguire feels like at least he owes the Congress and the American public an explanation of his actions in this matter.
Ken Dilanian. Ken, thank you for rushing to us with that reporting. We will find out what happens tomorrow.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.